Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1506-1506. Thank you for joining us today as we do part two from yesterday, as we dive into the commercial real estate market for some big surprises, some pleasant surprises. But the quote for the day, now this was on, you've heard our investment counselor Carrie on the show before, and you've actually heard her daughter on the show before speaking Mandarin Chinese. Amazing what these kids know nowadays, isn't it? Anyway, she has a great quote on her email signature that I've always liked, so I thought I'd share it with you today. And it is from Karen Lamb, and it goes like this. It's very simple, but sometimes the greatest truths are so simple. And think about this in the context of real estate investing or in the context of anything that you've been wanting to do or do more of, or something you've been procrastinating about. You've been putting this off. And the quote is, "A year from now, you will wish you had started today." Amazingly simple. A year from now, you will wish you had started today. Think about it. Think about if you started last July and that was your first rental property. You would have gone through the last boom phase of last year, 2019. You would have gone through the coronavirus COVID crisis, and you would have been worried. And now you would be jumping for joy because everything is going your way, even though you were really worried a couple of months ago. Isn't that funny how time just has an effect? You know, a thing I always say is time heals all wounds. And the Karen Lamb quote is somewhat like the quote, "What's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. What's the second best time to plant a tree? Today." That's not exactly true, but you get the idea, right? The idea makes so much sense. And amazingly, the people that win in life are the people that just do things. In life, there is a certain wisdom in action, even if it is the wrong action, amazingly. Just doing things tends to just work out. And I've mentioned it before, but make sure you see the movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey. It's kind of a dopey, funny movie, but it has a big lesson. You know, saying yes to more stuff is generally, not always. You got to be smart, obviously, but saying yes to things that you exert control over. Saying yes to being a direct investor rather than putting your money in some fund or some stock or mutual fund or whatever. But even if you did that, a lot of times you just win at that. And the Jim Carrey Yes Man movie just shows you how his sort of dumb luck, just by saying yes to a lot of things, it tends to just kind of work out, It's a very odd thing about life, but that's why just intrinsically, action has its own intrinsic wisdom. So I got a couple listener questions that I want to get to today before we get to our guest, Joshua Simon, CEO of Simon CRE. CRE, of course, means commercial real estate. He was very insightful when he talked to us about this. But let's see. Here is a question from Atul, and he is saying, "Hello, I live in San Francisco Bay Area. Both my wife and I work in San Francisco Bay Area, but we have been renting Well, that's a smart move in San Francisco area, right? Renting is a much better deal there, especially if you have that ridiculous government rent control, right? And he goes on to say, we have saved more than $400,000 and have not been able to buy a home or have been reluctant. Hey, read The Reluctant Investor's Lament, but don't think of San Francisco when you read it. That's the only thing, okay? and that's that great poem by Donald Wheel we've shared with you in the past. Or have been reluctant because of low RV ratios. Well, hey, you're right about that. That's a good point. We do want to live in the Bay Area, but are keen to get guidance and learn about opportunity. In a few years, we will not necessarily be bound to the Bay Area. Our daughter graduates from high school in 2023, so we have much more mobility after she goes to college. Thank you, Atul. Okay, so that's a good question. Now, first of all, I just got to tell you a personal thing here. As a child, I was bugged by the seeming indifference of moving me around. And it seems like even though, I grew up in Los Angeles and was always in LA, okay, pretty much most of my childhood, but we'd move around Los Angeles to different areas. And it felt like I was always starting a new school every 2 years. It's pretty much how it went for me. I went to a school until 5th grade, and then I changed. Well, 1st grade, I went to one school, then, 2nd through 5th, another one, and then 6th grade, another one, and then junior high. Of course, you have to change schools for junior high, which is normally 3 years. I only went there for 2.5. And then I changed and lived in upstate New York with my grandparents and really got a culture shock with that. Living on a dirt road, that was pretty interesting. Living on the farm, though, it's good to have perspectives for sure. And did that and then came back to LA. And 10th grade, I went to one school in LA. And then I went to another school for the last 2 years of high school in Long Beach. And so I moved around. Now, I didn't much like that as a kid, I have to tell you. But, in some ways, it was definitely good for me. You know why it was good for me? Number one, because I got diversity of experiences, diversity of people, diversity of opinions, of lifestyles, of education, all of this kind of stuff. But also, it forced me to get good at making new friends. And an easy life is not always a good thing. Sometimes you got to stir things up, even if you do it intentionally. If life doesn't stir it up for you, stir it up yourself. So when I hear parents say, oh gosh, we can't move because our kid is in school or whatever, right? I get it, but there's a flip side of that. Because compared to what? Yeah, your kid will have all the same friends, but guess what? They won't have any new friends and they won't experience something different. So it's there's always trade-offs with everything. But enough of that. What do I know about bringing up children? Nothing. Okay, so I will shut up with my advice there because I am horribly unqualified. But real estate, I'm qualified. So I really would just keep renting Atul. That's my suggestion. Just keep renting. And by the way, your rents in San Francisco, if you haven't been scared away by coronavirus and civil unrest and the extremely high cost of living and the extremely high taxes and the fact that nothing is open because it's all locked down and shut down, if that didn't scare you away, and hey, this decision might get a lot easier, by the way, to move somewhere else right now. So that's a good point. Think about it. But if you're going to stay there until 2023, then just keep on renting and renegotiate your rent. See if you can get a better deal or a better property in general, because rents in high density areas like San Francisco are falling. They're already extremely high, so they needed to have an adjustment anyway, but there's much more downward pressure on those rents now. And take that money and invest in properties nationwide and get good at it. Treat it seriously. Treat it like a business. Treat it like it really matters. A lot of people go into this and, they don't treat it with enough respect sometimes. I'm not saying that you would do this. I'm just making a general statement to try and speak to everybody listening because, it really is the most historically proven asset class in the entire world. Of course, you'll have fantastic rent to value ratios. It's much better than locking up that $400,000 in a San Francisco property that's going to cost you $2 million. And it's probably almost assuredly going to go down in value with the civil unrest and the flight from the cities and the Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck 2020 version. By the way, I watched that movie last week. I had never seen the movie. We had to read the book in high school, in my last high school that I went to for 2 years, 11th and 12th grade in Long Beach. And we had to read that book, The Grapes of Wrath, about the great American migration. And I watched the movie last week, and it was really interesting to see that. It didn't have a lot of the cool symbolism that the actual book did. Oh, I hate when people say that. When the intellectual snobs say, well, the book was better. Oh, yes, of course, you're so literary. But the book actually was better, I think, than the movie, although that was a long time ago, so maybe I can't remember. But yeah, watch The Grapes of Wrath and just get a perspective for how good we have it nowadays, okay? Just how good we have it. But it truly is amazing to just see the perspective of how people lived back then, what they experienced, how poor they were, how scarce everything was in the world, and just how hard it was to get by. It's really, if you think you have suffering now, watch an old movie like that for some perspective. But as we see this mass migration going on out of high-density urban areas and the de-urbanization of the United States, and maybe the world too, but, not sure about the rest, but definitely of the U.S., you can get some great properties in these markets. That's where as Wade and Gretzky, the famous hockey player, said, I skate to where the puck is going. Where is the puck going? The puck is going to suburban markets. It's even going to rural markets to some extent, but that's a bit extreme, frankly. Suburbia is more than adequate to socially distance and not have ridiculous civil unrest by protesters who are largely clueless. So skate to where the puck is going. The puck is going out of high-density, expensive, overpriced, overtaxed cities that are risky, and it is going to nice suburban markets, especially when you're buying properties below the median price in those markets. And you can find those at jasonhartman.com/properties. And at our upcoming Meet the Masters, we will be holding some properties, especially for that event, as we customarily do, and we will be showing them to you. If you are attending, go to jasonhartman.com/masters and get your tickets. And those tickets have been selling really, really well. So we are just very grateful that so many of you have expressed an interest in our first virtual conference, our 22nd anniversary event with Ken McElroy, Rich Dad author Ken McElroy, Rich Dad author Sharon Lechter, George Gammon, and economist Harry Dent, and many others. So it's going to be a great event. So make sure you get your tickets for that. jasonhartman.com/masters, and the properties, of course, at jasonhartman.com/properties. Okay, another question we had, and then we will get to our guest. Where is that other question as I'm scrolling? Okay, Michael Pavick asked this question, and I believe, Michael, you are a client, so thank you for being a client. Hey, Jason, I participated in the funding webinar and signed up for the service. I haven't heard any mention about the company from you since the webinar, like I have with the asset protection webinar. Well, the reason is that number one, we wanted to get a little feedback and see how people were liking the experience, which is what you're asking about. So I'll get to that in a moment. But number two, that asset protection webinar has just been really, really well received. And you can check out the asset protection webinar at jasonhartman.com/asset. Lots of convenient times, I'm sure, that you can fit into your schedule. That is a very educational webinar. And I have an appointment with our featured attorney tomorrow, actually, to talk to him about it. So that's why I've mentioned it. That webinar just was very much in high demand. People wanted to watch it twice. They learned a lot from it. That's why I'm saying it. But as far as the funding, yeah, we have been hearing good things. It's a process. It takes a while. That program is not super quick. Now, most people have received, most people that I can't say most because I haven't surveyed everybody, but the people I have talked to, our clients and attendees that I have talked to, said they have received somewhere in the neighborhood of like $30,000 to $40,000 in funding pretty quickly, and they're still working on more. So it's a process that unfolds over time, and we're waiting to hear more about it before we invite that speaker back to do another webinar. So that's it on that. And when I posted that in our content group, I got a comment actually from our client, Sean Carroll, who you heard on the show. And he's going to be participating in our upcoming Meet the Masters event because he is actually a professional actor who, by the way, lives in New York City and was always telling me, Jason, you're right. People are moving out of New York City. Well, yep. And he's always given me examples of that. But he says that he signed up for the service and he is using the credit. He's told me some good things about it, so he seems to have liked it. And then Michael goes on to say, he says, thank you for everything you have done to change the lives of my family. I've been investing in your properties for 12 years now and recently had my daughter buy her first investment property through your network, getting her started young. Hey, Michael, I love hearing that. That's awesome. That is totally awesome. So glad to hear your daughter is now a real estate investor and that you've been investing with us for 12 years. So thank you so much for your continued support and hope that's helpful. And let us know how the funding works out for you. We'd love to hear more. And I'm sure we're going to get more feedback over time from more of our clients and our listeners. All right, without further ado, let's get to Joshua Simon part 2 today. And again, you don't really need to have listened to part 1. Occasionally when we do break a guest up because it was a long interview, if it was really important that you hear it all at once, we wouldn't have split it. You can make sense of these without hearing the other half. Okay, so just wanted to mention that for you. And here is Josh Simon talking about commercial real estate and the impacts on the economy as a whole. So one thing on balance I think we need to mention for the listeners is that, we'll have a worldwide audience hearing this presentation, 189 countries, but mostly in the US. And you are in an environment and your properties, I'm guessing, are all in an environment where you've got a low-rise suburban environment, right? So this is obviously going to be very different in a place like San Francisco, New York City, downtown LA, downtown Seattle, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. I think I think that's also a long-term trend that will continue is the value of something being located next to a transit center isn't nearly going to be as desirable as something maybe out in the suburbs. And I think that's why places like Phoenix, which has done pretty well through this whole, COVID period, I think will continue to see really good growth because we are spread out. We don't have the mass transit infections spreading. And so I think long-term trends, for the West Coast overall, California is its own animal.
It's its own set of problems.
Yeah, its own set of problems.
California is the problem child of the country, and New York's the second one, I'd say. But yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, we've been talking about this mass migration for 2.5 months that we predicted is going to happen. And now the media is finally catching on from high density environments to low density environments. And I think the highest danger zones that are sort of necessity participation are elevators and mass transit. Those two are probably the most dangerous places, at least in my opinion. Going to a gym is optional, going to a movie theater is optional, that kind of stuff. But elevators, so when you've got buildings that are 3-4 stories and above, people are pretty much in an elevator. And in Phoenix, you don't have that type of thing, so that's good. And in city environments that are very urban, even once you get out of your own house, everything is crowded. The street is crowded. The sidewalk is crowded. The restaurants are crowded. The coffee shops are crowded. And of course, there's new laws and regs about that stuff limiting it. But still, whenever I'm in New York City, if I want a cup of coffee, I got to go to a crowded coffee shop. They're all crowded. That's just the way it is. So I don't know how they're going to serve that many people there because in a normal environment, there's just been a shortage of supply of anything you want in those environments. So how do you enforce social distancing? I don't know if it's even possible.
It's tough, right? Like 6 feet away. Like, how do you do that even it's just really hard to even do that in an office environment. You're walking down the hall And, those coffee shops in New York, I hope they just can reopen, because if you've been shut down now for, what is it, going on 60, 75 days, and they could still be closed for a couple months more, I find it probably pretty disheartening. You and I can imagine as business owners if we weren't able to transact. It's going to be an interesting case study looking forward, a year on which business is open or who relocates. But, I find that places like Florida, Phoenix, people are going to want to be here.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's going to be a mass migration to the suburban markets. I call it the Grapes of Wrath 2020. It's from John Steinbeck's old novel, right? And this is a whole new world we're moving into. Very interesting. Okay, talk to us about lending, operations, e-commerce, kind of where all this stuff is going.
Yeah, so for lending, I was almost going to put declining, but it is negatively affected, but I do see some stability in it. If you've got the right type of product and you have existing lending relationships, there's still money out there. The debt is cheap. If you can refinance or do any kind of floating rate, now's the time. I really believe that. And then, from an operations standpoint, it really just depends on really where geographically, where you're located and what kind of type of business do you have. We saw a huge demand and spike in hotel rooms in Phoenix over Memorial Day weekend, and then up in Sedona. There was a big increase in demand. And then obviously we talked about e-commerce. That's going to continue to force brick and mortar retailers to get smarter with their inventory and really migrating their online presence with their store presence. And, I think you look at like Nordstrom's, I think they're the best example of it, where, hey, order online, pick up in store. You can go to the store. If they don't have your shoe size, they'll ship it from their distribution center and you have it the next day.
Yeah, very interesting. So we didn't mention hotels until just now. When you say big spike, compared to what is the question? There was no demand for hotels the last 75 days or so. So do you have any occupancy numbers or anything like that for?
I don't have occupancy numbers, but I've talked to a couple hotel owners in the Valley, and they were pleased with the progress overall. And so what does actually pleased mean? That's a good question. Phoenix, I had several friends from Chicago that moved down here for the last 2 months and stayed in like an extended stay hotel. And I think those have done overall pretty well, the extended stays versus some of your full line hotels.
Mm-hmm. I agree, because they're inexpensive enough to be affordable, and people wanted to escape those urban environments. And, they probably spent a lot of time looking at neighborhoods when they were there and thought about moving, because now everybody's really realized, we can work remotely. Not that the technology is anything new, but, people just weren't using it enough. Now everybody's using it, even non-techie people are all on Zoom. They're all on Skype. They're all using all of the online systems now. So that's really great. And see, those efficiencies will stay with us long after this is over. So that's a good thing. All right, snapshot here.
Yeah, I just put that in there. Just, hey, we are still very overall bullish. Obviously, activity's been affected, but we feel like, in the places we develop, the economy will come back, and I think it'll come back pretty quick. We're seeing construction costs. I don't think there's going to be a huge dip in construction costs, but there's definitely going to be some pricing impact, which I think is positive. And look, we're going to do more deals this year from a new development standpoint than we have in the last 10 years that we've been in business in any single year. So we'll do over 40 this year, and at least 65 escrows closed. So extremely busy year, and I don't really see that changing.
That's, what? Congratulations. That is great to hear, and that is so different from the picture we're getting on the news media. It really is just very different. But we do need to keep in mind, everybody, that based on your suburban location and also property type, so it's very dependent on a lot of these things. I've got to ask you, before we wrap it up, how about self-storage in this kind of environment? I haven't owned any self-storage yet. I do a mobile home park and apartments. Certainly, I've had a lot of apartments. But what about something like self-storage, this sort of specialized asset class? How's that going to do through all this?
I think it'll do great. I think in some markets it was overbuilt. Funny you asked that. We actually are doing, we have 3 projects that are RV and boat storage, which is very popular in a place like Phoenix. And so we've got one project under construction in Tucson, which is, about 1 million person MSA, 2 hours southeast of Phoenix. And we've got 2 more. And what we kind of found out is like, hey, if you have these retail projects like a mall down the road or a bigger shopping center, if you're able to redevelop part of it for, an alternative use like storage or RV and boat, I think you can really create a lot of new value. And so we're pretty excited for that and new opportunities that come with it.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Josh, give out your website.
It's SimonCRE.com, Simon Commercial Real Estate.
Okay, excellent. SimonCRE.com. Thank you so much. One final question before you go, and thank you for sharing this great information with us. Let's talk for a moment about reuse. And we didn't talk about office properties. I know that's not really your thing, but I think office properties, that's kind of a big deal in the commercial real estate sector as to what's going to happen with offices now that, Twitter, Facebook has said, folks, go home. You can work at home indefinitely. And lots of companies are saying that. And I think that's really a good thing. It's going to be good for the environment because there won't be as much smog and pollution or consumption. And I think people will like their lives a lot better. Not completely. You need some human interaction, but most people kind of like working at home, I think, at least nowadays. These office properties and then some retail properties, not the ones that you're engaged in as much. Are we going to have a big change in zoning laws, do you think, in different parts of the country, maybe turning some of these properties into alternate uses? I mean, shopping malls you mentioned, what do we do with, you said that's a really hard hit segment of the retail portfolio. What's going to happen with these properties?
Yeah, and malls are super complicated because of the ownership structure. There could be multiple owners that own different department stores and then the core of the mall. And there's lots of agreements that kind of dictate the rules and what the allowed reuse is. That aside, I think it comes down to having municipalities that really see what needs to be done now and not waiting till it becomes blighted. Most cities count on the retail sales for sales tax revenue. And so I think, look, it's a partnership on those bigger shopping centers to redevelop them before they become blighted. And I think, look, things will continue to change and evolve. And I'm pretty bullish on all of that. Like we've got a couple malls here in Phoenix that are going to be redone in the near future, and they're going to be great multifamily. They'll have, probably some self-storage in the back, but they'll have new uses and they're being reimagined.
Is that a complete teardown, or can you make a reasonable reuse out of that property in its existing configuration, or is it just a wrecking ball and then build something new?
A lot of it can be a wrecking ball. A lot of it's reimagined. We're selling about 5 acres right now, part of about 10,000 square foot shopping center we're in the middle of redeveloping that was mostly vacant, and we're selling it to a charter school. And they're actually going to use the footprint of the existing, it's about 30,000 square feet, used to be retail space, and they're going to reimagine the facade and make it a school, and they've got their bus lane and their playground in the back. And so I think it's, hey, how do we, talk about being environmentally friendly? Hey, how do we kind of reimagine, repurpose existing buildings?
Yeah, but schools, I mean, is school going to look the same after this? I don't know. It's just hard to know. But yeah, that is a creative use for sure. Very interesting times we are in. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody listening, thank you for joining us. And happy investing and stay well. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.